Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Ecto. This is episode 11. And the stories I'm going to be telling you tonight are one of them is from our listeners and one of our fans in one of the horror groups, True Horror Junkies, Dead and Good. And he sent me a story, which is, wait till you hear this one. It's pretty wild. And then the other one will be from a friend of mine, also named Denise, who claims that one night her doorway in her house sent her to another dimension. So, anyway, stay tuned for just a minute. I'm going to put on a couple songs here so I can advertise in the groups and things like that, and I'll be right back. Hey, and welcome back to Ecto. My name is Michelle. I'm going to be your host tonight. Give me just a second. I'm going to load this story. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing it right. Denton Gooden. This is his story that he sent to me. It's really wild. So, and he told me I could use his name. So, let's see. It's here somewhere. Okay, this one is called The Mirror. He said, here is the entire tale. He says, this all happened in the summer of 1994 when I was 16 years old. Every word, while sounding like a completely fictionalized tale, is true. My stepbrother had just graduated high school and was getting ready to go off the Great Lakes for basic training. We decided to have one more adventure, so we packed up his car and made the trip to Athens County, Ohio, where my stepdad was born and raised. Our mutual friend Brian had asked to go along, and we didn't see why not. Upon our arrival, our Aunt Candy informed us that we would be staying in the old family farmhouse, which had been abandoned for almost 2 years at that point, and our cousin Casey would be joining us. To me, it was more the merrier. Just a second. Yeah, it's trying to load. Okay. We got to the farmhouse, and as we had so many times before, stood looking at the house, only this time it was different. Usually I would look at the house and admire how old the house was, but still looked brand new. This time it looked old and run down. Somehow it felt wrong. We took our bags inside and settled down, quickly deciding that we were all going to sleep in the large sitting room, and headed back to my aunt's house for dinner and some air conditioning. Nope, the old farmhouse didn't have any cool system at all. We were all dreading it. It was about 95 degrees in the shade, and the house was even hotter. After dinner, we retired to the farmhouse where the 4 of us claimed our sections of the floor to sleep and turned on every fan in the house. We read books, played video and board games, and goofed around. At some point, we all decided it was a good idea to try some of the stuff in a book Brian had. I found it really weird that Brian wouldn't let any of us see the book he had. He kept covering it up, and he would read what was written in it. At first, we were all having a ball, but it quickly got dark. We were all sitting in a circle on the floor, listening to Brian's instructions on what to do when we suddenly heard footsteps upstairs. We knew we were alone. The main floor of the house was locked, and the lock on the door had been rusted for at least a year on the kitchen door. And when it opened, it made this horrible screech. Not to mention anyone coming in would have been seen by one of us. We stopped messing around and listened. The longer we sat there, the more footsteps we heard, until we were sure there were at least six large men upstairs. Finally, Chad and Brian decided to peek around the corner to see what they could. Casey and I stood at the doorway and watched them creep through the living room and disappear around the corner into the foyer. No sooner did they disappear, Chad came rushing back, and around his face was filled with only I could describe as sheer, untainted terror. And Brian was right behind him, but with a much different expression on his face. No fear, but disappointment. Chad stood there and told Casey about how he had stopped to stare at a mirror at the top of the stairs, and how the frame of the mirror was glowing a bright electric blue, and how the shadow that was being cast on the wall seemed to turn and look at him. The thing Chad didn't understand was how there was a shadow upstairs when there were no lights on. We all sat back on the floor while Brian read this book, and we listened to the footsteps roam upstairs. After a few minutes, Casey, who was sweating like he was sitting in the oven, started shaking and saying he was cold. He even reached behind him and grabbed an Afghan off the couch and wrapped himself up in it. His teeth were chattering, and you could even see his breath as he exhaled. Finally, Brian told us to close our eyes and envision the room we were in bathed in white light, and to force the light into the corners. When I first closed my eyes, it was like living darkness was trying to come through the doorway from the living room, and the darkness had 4 sets of blue glowing lights staring back at me. I could still see Brian, Chad, and Casey, and each was surrounded by different light, and Casey's light was dim and getting dimmer as I watched. I heard a voice that told me push some of the light to him, or to them. The voice was deep but soothing and didn't belong to anyone there. I thought about making the light pulse around the doorway, and it did, making the eyes move back and some hissing to fill the room. The darkness retreated for a moment before darting back and grabbing Casey and started dragging him out into the living room. I should mention that I had been drawing a sword earlier, nearly every day for about 2 weeks before this incident. It was very ornate and never seemed very practical, being covered with various jewels and a blade made of gold. So he'd been drawing this 2 weeks prior to this event, every day. As Casey was being dragged, the three of us jumped to our feet and ran after him. As we entered the darkness, I was finally able to see the owner of those eyes. They were humanoid, but with the hooves of a horse. No facial features could be seen. It was like the eyes were suspended in black, darker than dark, and their hands had claws tipping with each finger. Two of the shadows split from the group, one each going after Chad and Brian, and I could see the other two dragging Casey towards the portal. My instincts told me to imagine I had a weapon and charged toward the two holding Casey. I imagined that I had this ornate sword from my drawings, and suddenly the dark was lighter. The shadows had a more definite shape. I slashed at the closest thing holding Casey and watched as the head flew from the body and into the portal. The other shadows hissed. The one I had attacked screamed the most horrible sound I have ever heard, and the three retreated and ran into the blue portal. The rest of us retreated to the sitting room. We all had entered the sitting room. We opened our eyes, and I was greeted by the sight of Casey throwing the Afghan off his shoulders, sweating immediately pouring down his face. Brian started talking us through closing the portal, and shortly after the sun rose, we left very early that morning and didn't want to come back at all that night. We told my older cousin Chris what happened, and he didn't believe us. We tried to get my aunt to let us sleep at her house, saying the farmhouse was too hot, which it really was, and she said no. We spent the day making protection talismans under Brian's instruction. Mine was given to me by a female friend of Casey's who told me she didn't want anything to happen to me. I was told years later by Casey that she was a white witch. Inevitably, we ended up back at the house for a second night. Brian wanted to reopen the portal, which Chad and I were admittedly against, of course. We heard plenty of banging and walking upstairs, but it never came downstairs to bother us. As the second night drew on, Chad and I heard things outside. Stones were being thrown at the windows. Scratching sounds were coming from the doors. After a while, it subsided, and I started to nod off on the floor. Then I heard this horrible scream, so dark and gut-wrenching that I made my hair stand out on end and my skin crawl. It also scared the hell out of me. I remember screaming and jumping to my feet, my hands curled into fists, and my mind telling me they had returned for me. As my vision cleared, I saw my older cousin curled up in a ball on the kitchen floor, laughing so hard he was crying and unable to breathe. As it turns out, it was him outside throwing stones at the windows and scratching the doors. He made the comment that it was a nice try for us to go upstairs to try and see him. When we said it wasn't us, he said, "Yeah, right," and kept laughing. A few short hours later, we were sitting at my aunt's kitchen table, and Chris was still laughing. Then we made the trip home, and we have barely spoken about it since. And then there's an update here. It says, my cousin Chris later moved into that old farmhouse and experienced some strange things. Now this is the guy that was playing the joke on them on the second night. It says, as a kid he collected transformers and brought them to the farmhouse. He said he would find Optimus Prime sitting in the middle of the hallway or on the steps, always assuming it was his daughter, and would put Optimus away and tell her not to, stop playing with his toys, basically. After he locked up the room, or his wife would go for a day trip with his daughter, he would find the transformer out of the room. He said our grandfather got sick shortly after a strange mirror had appeared on his wall, leading to the second story of his house, a different house other than the farmhouse. He died after a brief battle in 2006. Then my grandmother passed away earlier this year. I decided to do some research on the mirror and destroy it. As it turns out, the mirror that was in the old farmhouse is not the same one in my grandparents' house. My grandmother had the mirror in her house, refinished it, and put it in a new frame. I asked about the mirror in the farmhouse and discovered that my uncle had rented the house with the antique furniture, and these people had stolen all the furniture in the house, including that dreaded mirror. I feel a certain amount of satisfaction and guilt when I say that the mirror is someone else's problem now. So, imagine that, people. Somebody rented this house and they now have this mirror. And God knows what they did with it. It could be in a flea market. It could be at a thrift store. It could have been at a pawn shop. They could have just gave it to their, whoever. And it's just floating around somewhere. So, be very careful of the mirrors you try to buy, I guess. It's the only thing I can tell you. So, wow, Denton, thank you very much for that story. That's kind of creeped me out. Now, every time I see a mirror anywhere, it doesn't matter where it is, I'm going to be just creeped out. Oh my God, especially old ones in frames. So, yeah, y'all, be careful. There's a crazy, and I believe it. I do. I believe in stuff like this. So, anyways, I will be back in just a couple minutes. I am going to be back with another story of a friend of mine, basically like a dimension story, and she swears this happened, or she swears she wasn't drunk, wasn't sleeping, so anyways, here you go. Enjoy a few of these songs. I'll be right back.
At the going down of the sun and at the morning dawn, I think of your hands like those of broken ghosts. When as I close my eyes, strangers that disguise that feeling not for long that I thought was nearly gone. But it soon came back. It soon came back. It soon came back somehow. Set free and I want to feel the same, but the ghosts of our lives are chasing me again. And I remember how when I came back from the south, I gave the moon a rest, and you were no longer there. But you soon came back. You soon came back. You soon came back somehow. You soon came back somehow. Union Square and back in the London rain, a ghost that comes back like a song that never ends. You know where to find me if you ever need me. You might feel like you do once you've had a drink or two, but you soon came back. You soon came back. You soon came back somehow. But you'll soon come back. You'll soon come back. You'll soon come back. Somehow.
Okay, and welcome back to Ecto. That, I don't know about y'all, but that last story kind of gave me the creeps just to think that right now out there, there's just, you know what I mean? I will never, seriously, never, I will never look at any mirror the same. I mean, I'm not talking about the ones at the chain stores. I'm talking about, like, you go to, different places, Goodwill, Salvation Army, just kind of, see what they got, look at the local finds or even antique stores. Every time I see a mirror, I'm just going to run. So, thank you for that, Dent. Anyway, okay, this story coming up here is from another friend, also Denise. She swears this happened to her last year. She said she's never really talked about it, never really been able to explain it. But some people tell her that it's because she was sleeping, or that she had gotten up from sleep and that she hadn't woke up yet. Other people tell her she was still drunk, so... Alright, this is her story. She says, it was 2 nights after New Year's Eve. We all had decided, because New Year's Eve we were working, that we would decide to have our own little New Year's Eve party, but late. She said we had been up until 2 or 3 in the morning partying. She said I was a little tipsy, but I wasn't totally drunk, She said I could still walk, talk, had all my faculties. And she said that she had fallen asleep on the couch in their house. And apparently her husband just left her there because he was kind of, a little drunk himself and didn't feel like going through the process. Apparently she's a hard sleeper and says, he wasn't going to wake her up and all this stuff. So she said it was right before the sun rose. She said it was just around 5-something in the morning. The sun hadn't quite come up yet. She said she had gotten up and she was really cold. She said she remembers she was really, really cold. And that the room kind of seemed like it was almost glowing, like this light blue color. She said like the whole room was, and she couldn't figure out what nightlight it was coming from. So she said she had gone down the hall and she went to the bathroom. And she said while she was in the bathroom, she was hearing rattling outside and she couldn't figure out what happened. So she had come out of the bathroom. And she said she walked out and the house was all lit up. And she said she walked into the living room and the lamps were all on. And she said that there was an older gentleman sitting on the couch. And she said she kept staring at him and couldn't figure out. She said he looked so familiar, but she couldn't figure out where she knew him from. So she heard noises in the kitchen and she had walked in the kitchen and she heard a woman probably in her 30s saying, hey, Dad, do you want, something to drink? What do you, She said the gentleman called her Pooh Bear or something like that, and that's what her husband called their daughter. He said something like, yeah, I'll have a Coke, Pooh Bear. And she brought it out to him, and she quickly realized that that was her husband, but older. And that this woman standing in front of her was her daughter. And she thought she was dreaming. She said she kept hitting herself, but nobody could hear her. And she was looking around and she seen children. She seen these young kids, and one of them kind of looked like her daughter, but it wasn't. She kept calling her daughter Mommy. And she said people were coming in, and she said people she knew, but they were older, and she just couldn't believe. And then she said she kept hearing conversations, so she ran back into the bathroom. She was just so scared. She ran back in the bathroom. She closed the door. And she thought, okay, there's something wrong. This has to be a dream, She said, so I opened the door again. She said, this time I went out and the house was dark again. So she said, I thought maybe I just finally woke up. So she said, I went into my bedroom to turn on the light, and I couldn't turn on the light. She said the light would not turn on. And she said, this is wrong, there's something wrong. But she saw 2 people in her bed. So she's like, what in the world? What happened, And she's trying to go over there, and she's trying to see who they are, and she's yelling, and she could see one of them was obviously her husband, and she's looking, and she's staring, and she can't figure out who the other person is. So finally, at some point in time, her daughter had gotten up, but it's her daughter like the age now, had gotten up and turned on a light in the hallway. So the light in the hallway was kind of illuminating the bedroom. So she goes in her look, and it's her. She's staring at herself in this bed. She was just like freaking out. She couldn't figure out what was going on, and her daughter had went and used the bathroom that she just came out of. So of course now she's scared that her daughter's gonna experience what she did, but it didn't happen. Daughter came out of the bathroom, did her business, everything was fine, went back to her bed. And she said what's strange is she thought her daughter saw her. She said that her daughter stopped and kind of stared in the hallway where she was, but then kept going. So she said that she was just freaking out. And again, she sees this blue light go on like this. It's just like this really, I'm trying to think of the good word for it. It's just a blue, just a soft blue glow of a light. So she said she had gone into the bathroom again. She thought, okay, I got to get out of this. I don't know what's going on here. I don't get this. So she closes the door, and she thought, okay, I'm going to count to 10. So she does. She counts to 10. Hold on, I'm reading this. She said, I counted to 10, and when I came out of the bathroom again, she said, I was in my house, but it wasn't my house. She said, I seen like this orange carpet, and I seen this really bizarre, like olive colored paint on the wall. She said, there was like all these weird things around. She said, when I had gone into the living room, I seen these people sitting there, and she said they looked like they were from like some kind of 60s program. She said they had on like these bell-bottom pants and these like dark orange shirts with butterfly collars. Oh my gosh, that'd be so weird. She said, and she started looking around, and she's trying to recognize anybody, and she can't recognize a single person in this house. She's looking all around, and then finally somebody had caught her eye, and it was this lady. And she said that she was looking and looking, and she kept looking. Nobody could see her, but she kept looking at this woman. And she started noticing something about her eye. She realized she knew this woman. She kept looking, and finally it dawned on her. The lady that she was looking at was the elderly lady that sold them the house. So she's like, what on earth? Oh my God. She said she was just freaking out. She said, I ran back into that bathroom again, and I closed the door, and I sat there sobbing and sobbing and sobbing. And she said pretty soon she hears a knock at the door. She actually heard the knock. And it was her husband saying, honey, are you okay? Are you coming back to bed? So she said that she opened the door, and she practically like just fell into his arms. He's like, whoa, what is going on with you? And she's like, I woke up on the couch. He's like, why were you on the couch? And she said, well, when we came back from the party, I laid down. He says, yeah, and you came right to bed. She's like, no, I was on the couch, and I went in here, and he was just, he's looking at her like she's nuts. He's like, just go to bed. Start calling her drunk and all, different things like that. She's like, no, you don't understand. She was describing in detail all this stuff, and yeah, and he, of course didn't believe her because she had been with him the whole time. But she has this whole different memory of when they came home. She does not remember going to bed. She remembers going to sleep on the couch. And she kind of went into different dimensions in this house whenever the soft blue. So she said from now on, if she ever sees another soft blue light in her house, she is not moving. She says, I'm just going to lay there until it goes away. So how weird is that? Could you imagine that? I mean, we've all kind of thought that as kids. Like, if you go into this place or you close the door, it's going to do that. But imagine it actually happening to you. And this is a person, like I said, she's not going to make up stories. She's not going to, like, just do this just to be on a show or have me read her. Yeah. I know her personally, and there's no way in hell that she either dreamt this and really thought it was real or something. So that is just crazy, crazy. So 2 crazy stories. So be careful of any mirrors you see out there, people. They say it's a portal to another dimension. A lot of people believe it, especially older mirrors. You never know what happens. So be careful of those, and also be very careful of blue lights, I guess, in your house. If you see this, don't go anywhere. So Anyways, this has been Ecto. You all have a wonderful night, and I guess I will see you next week. Thank you guys for creeping me out. Now I get to go out in the dark and go to work tonight. Thank you so much. Anyways, I will see you guys next week. Have a good night.